I'm going to take you through the writing process for how to write what's called a peel paragraph. Peel paragraphs are middle school to high school level paragraph writing for papers and essays, and it's a good framework to use in basic English papers. So peel is an acronym for point, evidence, explanation, and link, and those are the four parts of the paragraph. The point restates the question as a statement and then answers it with your own ideas. And if you're writing a standalone peel, then you also need to include some key information about whatever text you're referring to, and that includes the author's name, the title of the text, and the text type in your response. So these questions were derived from the book Wonder, and over on the right-hand side, we've got some potential answers. A aligns with A, B aligns with B, and C aligns with C. And see if you can identify which one of these answers is in correct point format and which one is not. Hopefully what you identified is that when it says, in the novel Wonder, Palacio makes the main character Augie win the audience's heart, it doesn't actually answer the question at all. Because if you look at the question, it doesn't ask us whether or not the audience likes the main character. It asks us what the author does to make us like Augie. And that's not in this response. In B, why is Julian mean towards Augie? This does not restate the question as a statement before responding to it. So this would be incorrect as well. It also misses key information like the title of the novel, the text type, and the author. And then we have C. Hopefully you identified it has all three of the major parts. It's got the text type, the text title, and the author's name, and it answers the question inside of the point. Now that we understand what the point is, let's take a look at the evidence. So your evidence must be an objective fact, and it should be a quote. And you must provide a context for your quote before giving it. When I say that it must be an objective fact, what this means is that the evidence can't have any slight bit of opinion in it. It can't be something that's debatable or something that you think at all. It has to be something that is provable, that's right there in the text in black and white. Like it says over here, 99.9% of the time, your evidence should be a quote. The only time you shouldn't provide a quote is when you don't have the text available. You also have to provide a context for your quote before giving it. So let's take a look at how to create context before you deliver a quote. In here we have our point. In the novel, The Tunnel, Michael Barnes uses detailed descriptions of dark places in order to create suspense in the story. Then we have to introduce the context for the quote. At one point in the story, the main character, Stephen, goes into a tunnel. That is the context for the quote. Dark as pitch and just as thick, thicker than the air, like it was a thing of its own, like you were swimming in it. Once again, these three options are taken from the novel Wonder, and take a minute and see if you can identify which one is correctly written evidence. So hopefully what you noticed is that A, what's up with your face, is something Julian asked, is not correct because it does not provide the context for the quote before it delivers the quote. If we look at B, this is okay, but it's not as strong as it could be because it doesn't provide us an actual quote. If we look at C, what we notice is that this is the strongest piece of evidence on here because it provides both the context for the quote. It tells us in the third chapter when during a school tour he asks before it provides the quote. So that makes for a really strong piece of evidence. After the evidence, you go into the explanation, and your explanation aims to explain the connection between your evidence and your point by connecting specific words and ideas. So your explanation is much longer than your point or your evidence. Your evidence may be 2 or 3 sentences depending on how many lines from a quote you've got, but your explanation needs to be 3 to 5 sentences. Your explanation should also point to specific words and ideas from your evidence. If we take a look at our previous point and evidence, let's think about how we can create an explanation of these two pieces. So it says, in the novel, The Tunnel, Michael Barnes uses detailed descriptions of dark places in order to create suspense in the story. At one point in the story, the main character, Stephen, goes into a tunnel in which the dark is described as dark as pitch and just as thick, thicker than the air, like it was a thing of its own, like you were swimming in it. Let's think about this explanation for a minute. What people tend to do mistakenly is to make associations that are very direct. They say it's dark, so that makes it scary. And if you were to write an explanation talking about how like the dark equals scary, it might sound something like this. The description of the tunnel as dark is what makes it scary. The dark is a scary thing, and that makes the character afraid. It also makes the reader afraid for him because the dark is so scary. It doesn't sound very fresh. It doesn't sound very nuanced. It doesn't sound like a very deep explanation at all. And that's because, once again, they kind of thought in this way, that the dark equals scary. And that's not really true at all. What's actually true is that we take the word dark and we put that into our brains. Our brains go through this whole process relating the dark to things that we already know. It searches through our associations about the dark in order to come out with a conclusion about it. One of the things about the dark, we know that when we are in the dark, we can't see. Because we can't see, we can't defend ourselves. Because we can't defend ourselves, then we start to think of all the monsters that could be out there, and we realize that we might die. And that all translates into a fear response. So a good explanation doesn't just go from dark to fear. A good explanation explains all of the associations that happen in your brain before you get to this end point. So rather than having this, where it just kind of repeats over and over, the dark is scary, the dark is scary, the dark is scary, we can go into something more like this. The description of the tunnel in this way is suspenseful because it plays on people's worst fears. The dark makes people aware of their vulnerability and defenselessness, and it handicaps what few defenses human beings do have. As kids, we are bombarded with tales of monsters and witches who are out to eat us or worse. These beings famously lurk in dark places like inside closets and under beds at night. This is what makes the dark such a fearful thing. This actually searches through that entire mental process that connects the dark with our fears. Here's another example. So we're going to pretend that we're answering the question, what is the purpose of giving the sun emotions in the poem? And we're going to pretend that this is our point in evidence. Grace Nichols gave Sun emotions in the poem Sun is Laughing in order to make the audience feel sorry for the sun. At one point in the poem, Nichols wrote, then without warning, as if she was suddenly bored or just got sulky because she could hear no one giving her praise to her shining ways, Sun slammed the sky window closed, plunging the whole world into grayness once more. So think about it for a minute. How can you make connections in order to build up to a conclusion that relates to this point? So this is one strategy used for tackling explanations. I call it using monkey bar sentences because it's like swinging on the monkey bars when you're on the playground. And sometimes you grab onto both rungs for a minute and you kind of swing back and forth between them before you let go and you move forward. We're going to do that with our ideas in this sentence. The word sulky shows sensitivity. And possessing sensitivity means that the sun has emotions. Having emotions is a human trait, and these human attributes personify sun in a way that helps us feel what sun feels. In each one of these sentences, the idea that I mentioned last is the idea that I mentioned first in the very next sentence. This creates a very tight explanation that's easy to follow. This is the way that explanation would sound inside of a paragraph. Go ahead and take a moment and read that on your own. I've got another video on my channel about explanation writing. It takes you through the monkey bar strategy again, but it also offers something that I call the sniper strategy as well. So take a look at that video if you need a little bit more help on explanation writing. Lastly is your link. So the link in your Peel paragraph is supposed to connect your ideas from the concept back to the original prompt. And here's what I mean by that. You'll notice that down here at the end, this idea of us feeling let down directly relates to us feeling sorry for the sun. So that becomes our link. The last sentence in the Peel paragraph is the link, and it has to link back to the idea that you mentioned in your point. Let's see how it would look in this previous Peel paragraph. So we still haven't gone back to this idea that I asked for in the point, detailed descriptions, and suspense in the story. I've got to go back to those concepts. So my link is going to be something like this. To almost anyone, the experience of crawling into a dark cave in the middle of the woods is already terrifying, but the addition of the description of the dark as a thing adds a whole new layer of terror that builds tension in the reader as they fear for the character. One of the things you might notice here is that although I mentioned this concepts, I try to use different words to do it in some places. In the point, I use the words create suspense, and in the link, I use the words new layer of terror that builds tension. So I tried to use some new language that I hadn't previously used in order to make my link sound fresh. Let's take a look at some example peels. Using this peel paragraph, pause the video for a moment and see what you can notice about this example. There's something not quite right about it, and see if you can spot it. Okay, so hopefully what you noticed is that it does a good job in the point and in the evidence, but when it gets into the explanation, it leans on the word this a little bit too much. The start of the explanation is very good. This sort of uses monkey bar structure in that you can see that it says here, is part of her identity. Well, her identity is a girl in Afghanistan. So we have a little bit of a monkey bar here between these concepts. After being a girl in Afghanistan under the rule of the Taliban was very difficult, so the idea is the rule of the Taliban, and we start off the next sentence with the Taliban. But after this, the monkey bar sentence kind of falls apart, and the explanation leans a little bit too much on the word this. This made Parvana's hair something very intimate and personal to her. This sense of privacy and pride is what made it very hard for her to cut it. This is what made her hair such a symbol of Parvana's identity. So we can see these last three sentences all begin with the word this, which really weakens this explanation. Here's another example. Take a moment, pause the video, and see what you can observe about this particular example. So hopefully one of the things that you notice about this example, we see that there is no quote for the evidence. That said, each one of these facts used in the evidence is an objective, undebatable fact within these movies. In the first Iron Man movie, we see Tony Stark wrestling with the morality of being an arms dealer. That's not an opinion. There's no opinion in there. This is an objective fact of a subplot of the movie. The writers of the movie talk about it. The next piece of evidence reads, in another, we see Captain America torn between trying to be a patriot to his country and a loyal friend to his old friend, Bucky. Again, this is not in any way opinion, and so because it is an observable fact within the film, then we can use it as evidence. And the last one says, and in Spider-Man, Peter Parker is constantly wrestling with his self-esteem and self-worth. Again, this is just an objective fact. It's something that Stan Lee talks about all the time, that he wanted this teen superhero to be struggling with these issues. And these objective facts about the contents of the movies allow us to then analyze those objective facts, which is what the analysis effectively does here. And then at the very end, when we get to our link, we have to link it back to these concepts that I mentioned in the point, the theme of internal conflict resonating throughout the film versions of the universe. And that's what we have down here. It says, the tactic of weaving an internal conflict into the subplot has become as predictable as the appearance of a superpower. So we can see that this is an accurate restatement of the point, having proved the point through the analysis. This excellent peel was written by one of my 10th grade students, and I was really proud of the way that she crafted it. Read through it and identify the really solid parts of this peel. That's all I've got for you on peel paragraph writing. I hope that helps you write paragraphs in the future. And once again, take a look at my other videos on how to write an introduction paragraph for an essay and how to write better explanations if you need some help on that. Thanks.